Welcome to episode 8 of the Find Your Calling channel. In today's episode, we'll be taking a look at what identity is and why it's critical that you understand your own identity so that you can discover your personal calling in life. Also, I'll reveal two important questions that you need to ask yourself concerning your own identity, questions whose answers will affect your own pursuit to discover your calling. Thanks for joining this episode. The very first step in finding your calling is to clarify exactly who you are. You need to answer the question, what is my identity? Identity affects your motivation, your perception of reality, and your understanding of what is or is not important. These things, in turn, directly affect your ability to discern what your calling is accurately. Let's look at an example of how our identity can affect us. Suppose you're in a crowded restaurant and an announcement is made over the intercom that a serious accident has just happened down the street. They describe the make, model, and license plates of the cars involved, and then end the announcement. You don't recognize any of the vehicles described as belonging to anyone you know. You're mildly concerned, say a quick prayer for the safety and well-being of those involved, and go on with your meal. Now suppose a slightly different scenario plays out. You're in the same restaurant, the same announcement begins, but with one significant difference. One of the vehicles they describe has the same make, model, and license plate of your daughter's car. In this case, your reaction is going to be significantly different than in the first scenario. You're probably going to proceed to the crash site as fast as you can so that you can check and make sure she's okay. In the first scenario, you identify as a concerned citizen who is interested in the well-being of another person who just had a car accident. In the second scenario, you identify as the parent of the person who was just involved in the accident. Identity changes everything. In a related fashion, your perception and understanding of your own identity directly affect your ability to accurately perceive what your calling is, as well as your motivation to fulfill that calling. Correctly perceiving what your calling is directly impacts the level of passion and effort you will apply in the pursuit of your calling, as well as your personal level of satisfaction and fulfillment in the process. Let's examine the topic of identity through the lens of a well-known story from the Bible, the story of Moses. If you aren't familiar with Moses' story, here's a primer. The Egyptians enslaved the Hebrew people for hundreds of years. At some point, the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, decided that there were so many of these slaves that they might rise up and revolt, so he wanted to thin their ranks. He ordered that all the Hebrew baby boys be thrown into the Nile River, where they would promptly drown or possibly be eaten by the crocodiles. Moses' mother couldn't bear the thought of drowning her young son, so she put Moses in a floating basket and placed it in the Nile River. Moses was discovered and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter and then raised as a prince of Egypt. One day, Moses saw an Egyptian mistreating a Hebrew slave, Moses having most likely learned he was a Hebrew by this point, and he killed the Egyptian. Because of his crime, he was forced to flee for his life into the desert, where he promptly became a lowly sheepherder. 40 years later, God would appear to Moses in the form of a burning bush and inform him that he was being called by God to deliver the Hebrews from Egyptian bondage. Through many trials and tribulations, Moses then followed God's instructions and eventually succeeded in his calling to lead the Hebrews into freedom. Now, as callings go, you can't get any more clear than that. In fact, many of you wouldn't be listening to this right now if you'd experienced such a clear revelation of your own calling. However, the point I want to make is that Moses' understanding of who he was provided the foundation from which he was able and willing to fulfill his calling. I submit to you that, without a firm understanding of his identity, Moses would not have successfully fulfilled that calling. Let's suppose Moses had a different backstory. Let's suppose he wasn't a Hebrew, but he was from some other people group. Suppose he hadn't grown up in Egypt, and he didn't know who the Hebrews were. Only to then have God of the Hebrews show up to him in the form of a burning bush one day and tell him that he'd been chosen to deliver the Hebrews from bondage from the most powerful country in the region. What do you suppose his reaction might have been? Would it have been different? I'm betting it would have been. I imagine that, if this non-Hebrew sheepherder from the land of Canaan, who had never been to Egypt, had encountered God in this way, His reaction might have been something like the following: "Why do I care about some group of people enslaved in Egypt? I'm a sheep herder, for goodness sake. And who are you? You're some kind of god, but are you as powerful as the gods of Egypt? Thanks, but no thanks." But that's not how it played out. In fact, upon closer examination of the story in Exodus chapter 3, we learn a great deal about how important identity is for the person being called, as well as the one doing the calling. One of the first things God does after appearing to Moses is identify himself. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 6. He said also, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Then Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. God knows that identity is central to a person's calling. That's why the first thing he does when delivering a calling to Moses is establish precisely who it is who is issuing the call. We'll discuss this more at a later point in the audio series. For now, just understand that God thought this was important to clarify before giving Moses his own calling. The next point I want to make is that once God has done this and told Moses what he wants Moses to do, Moses' first question concerns Moses' own identity. In Exodus chapter 3, verses 10 and 11, it says, "Therefore, come now, and I will send you to Pharaoh, so that you may bring my people, the sons of Israel, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the sons of Israel out of Egypt?" Moses' first question isn't, "Okay, how do you expect me to do this thing?" Instead, the first thing Moses does is challenge the validity of God's calling for him based upon a faulty understanding of his own identity. In that moment, Moses thinks he knows exactly who he is. He's asking God a rhetorical question. Moses thinks he's unqualified to take on the challenge of this calling because he is the disgraced former prince of Egypt who is wanted for murder, who already failed to deliver the Israelites the last time he tried 40 years before. He's making an excuse for why he can't possibly be the right person to fulfill this particular calling. God, of course, knows this and responds in a way that is designed to encourage Moses not to fear, but to have faith that he can indeed accomplish the task with God's help. In verse 12 it says, "And he, God, said, Certainly I will be with you, and this shall be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God at this mountain." What happens next is very interesting. Moses understands at some fundamental level this whole thing about identity being key to fulfilling a calling. Moses knows that if he is to succeed in getting the Hebrew people to follow him, he will need to convince his fellow Hebrews of the identity of the one who gave him the command to lead them out of bondage. So Moses asks God to reveal his name in verses 13 through 15. Then Moses said to God, "Behold, I am going to the sons of Israel, and I will say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." God furthermore said to Moses, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial name to all generations." After this, Moses continues to demonstrate his reticence about the whole mission and argues with God about his suitability for the task. But eventually, Moses gives in and undertakes this journey to fulfill his calling from God. The takeaway here is that having a proper understanding of our identity, and God's identity as well, is key to fulfilling our calling. This same truth is made evident in the temptation of Christ in the New Testament, in Luke chapter 4, verses 2 through 13. When Satan tempts Jesus in order to stop Jesus from fulfilling his calling, Satan does so by challenging Jesus' understanding of his own identity in two of the three temptations. Satan starts two of the three temptations with the words, "If you are the Son of God." Satan also understands that identity is key to calling, and he is at work in each of our lives to warp our view of who we are and who God is so that we won't fulfill our calling. In many cases, unfortunately, he succeeds in accomplishing his evil task. In the upcoming episodes, we'll focus on practical steps to help unravel our perceived identity, discard the lies we've believed about who we are and who God is, and embrace the truth so that we can discern and live out our own calling with maximum effectiveness and clarity. But first, we need to lay the groundwork by completing our examination of identity. So far, we've established that identity directly relates to motivation, and motivation directly impacts the pursuit or lack thereof of our calling. In episode number 9, we'll dig deeper and answer some important questions. What happens when we have a warped view of who we are? And what happens when we believe we know who we are when we really don't? We'll discuss how the answers to these questions can affect our calling. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Find Your Calling channel. I encourage you to subscribe to this channel so that you can find out when future episodes are released. If you want additional resources to help you in your journey, please consider picking up the 2 books I've written on this topic, Find Your Calling Without Losing Your Mind, and Overcome the Obstacles and Succeed at Your Calling. Purchase links for both books can be found in the show notes below. If you find the information in these programs helpful, please share links to this material with your friends via social media. Thanks for watching, and may God bless your day.